In the course on the Synoptic Gospels, we touched on several issues already, and I would like to gear our attention to what we call the Synoptic Problem. The problem is there because of the fact that many people who have their say about the theological implications on what it means to have Gospels saying the same thing. But there is another intake, and I think that is also very important. That is the historical intake. So the idea from a historical point of view. And I don't mind so much, because for me the historical point of view and the theological point of view should be as close as possible together. Otherwise, we have the problem of saying one thing in one class and saying something else in another class. So we talked about the literary relationship among the Gospels, and yes, that is something that is very clear. When you read the text, you will find out for yourself very soon that there is a literary relationship. See the same stories popping up, even the same wording, the same order, and so we know there is a source, and others are building on that source. And now we like to find out what that source is, and that is what is called the Synoptic Problem. Remember, there are two parts in the course. This is a practicum course, so you have to read Matthew, Mark, and Luke. You have to prepare a sermon, and then you have to have a meeting with a number of people, whether that's a Bible study group or a church group or whatever group you can gather together to talk about the issue of the Synoptic Gospels. And then what I would like you to do is bring material from the Synoptic Gospels together so that they will understand not only the similarities but also the differences of the three Gospels which we are talking about when we speak about the Synoptic Gospels. And then you have to write a, let's say, one-page report on that, and also that you have to send in so I can see what you have done. Remember, there are things we work on, the basis we have the Word of God, and we consider that as a revealed Word of God. This is what the Lord your God or our God says. He is inspiring people. It's very specifically the prophets who wrote down the material which we now call the Bible, and therefore it's authoritative. It has authority over us. We cannot discuss what the Bible has to say, but the Bible is discussing what we have to say and do. And that's what the fourth thing, that's the living word. The word is alive, and we are also alive. And we have to do certain things according to what the Bible is saying, not overruling the Bible, but being under the Bible. Remember, we talked about the hapax legomena, we talked about the form criticism, the genre criticism, the textual criticism. We looked at the New Testament, all of different things in the New Testament that are important to us, but also the history, the backup for the manuscripts we have, and we need to be aware of facts that certain people have had something to say in the past. We are not the first generation Christians. The generations Christians who came before us also, they had the same Holy Spirit, and they had the same things to say. And so we can learn from them. We don't have to reinvent the wheel or reinvent fire. So that is what what do we need to do? We looked at literary criticism, doublets, things that are being doubled, commentary, stylistic differences, chronological variant, and how does one perform literary criticism. We're not going into that again, but just we are talking about the Synoptic Gospel, because this is, again, this is what we have available to us. So the Synoptic Gospels are there, and now we have to find out how come we have three, how come there are so much of lookalikes. And so there are a number of theories, and we are going to go into theories, but look at, even when you see that the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are similar, they have their own emphasis. Jesus is king, Jesus is the servant, Jesus is the Son of Man. So the three synoptic Gospels, they have their own way of doing things, their own way of saying things. So the authors, although being inspired by the Lord God, by the Holy Spirit, speaking about the Lord Jesus Christ, it is still, the emphasis is still different, because they have their own audience. If you write a book, you have an audience in mind. When you have a course like what we are doing now, we have a course, we have a target group in mind. We would like to cater for a certain group of people. Other people or other peoples are not excluded, but that is not our target group. So that's the same thing with the gospel. The gospel writers had a target group in mind. When Matthew wrote, he was writing in his mind to the Jews. When Mark was writing, he had in mind what Peter was saying, and so he was gathering material for Peter. And then you have Luke, and Luke, he had his own way of doing things, which are described in the epilogue of the gospel itself. So the first verses are actually saying, this is what I'm going to do. And he repeats that in the second book, in the book of Acts. So we know who we are talking about. So we know that when we speak about Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we know that those are the writers. We did not invent their names. We did not put their names on top of an existing text. No, we were trying to find who was the author, and so we attributed the material to the people who wrote it. So that is what we have with the Synoptic Gospels. And of course the same thing goes for the fourth Gospel and for the books of Paul and so on. You know, that's what we do. Remember, we had a literary interdependence, we had agreement in wording, we had agreement in order, we had agreement in parenthetical material, and we looked at Luke's preface. That is here, that's the text we have here. Since many have undertaken to set down an orderly account of the events that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed on to us by those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. I too decided, after investigating everything carefully from the very first, to write a orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the truth concerning the things about which you have been instructed. That is the chapter 1, verses 1 to 4 of the book of Luke. So yes, that's what we have. So we have a literary relationship, and we have a problem because like I said before, copyright did not exist at that time, but people would claim that it's too obvious. So there are similarities, but there are also differences. There are close verbal agreements, sometimes identical wording, same stories found in different forms. Sometimes they are a little bit longer or shorter. That depends on the person who is writing, because he had his target group in mind and he said, this is what the people need to know. So that's what he wrote. Same story told very differently. That's another thing, again, that is linked to the people you want to reach. And then same incident in different chronological sequence. We think time-wise, but the people at that time, they thought idea-wise. So they were presenting an idea, and they were presenting or a chain of ideas, and that's what we have in the Gospels. Again, here we are with the Synoptic Gospels, and you remember there were 3: Mark, Luke, and Matthew. Let me look at some of the material we have, and then we will discuss the issues. Okay, so we have what is called 97% of Mark is repeated in Matthew and Luke. So you can almost say, why do we need Mark? Well, there are certain things that Mark is saying that others are not saying. Matthew and Luke gain over 40% of their content from Mark. So the bigger Gospels are borrowing heavily from the smaller Gospel, Mark. Matthew and Luke also share about 200 verses that are not part of the Mark Gospel. So there's a difference there, and there's a difference in the text. There's even a difference between Matthew and Luke, but there's also similarity between Matthew and Luke, and you only find them in Matthew and Luke. You don't find them in Mark, you don't find them in John. So the idea that there is, except for Mark, Luke, and Matthew, seemingly, that's where the idea comes from. Seemingly there is another source, and I think Luke is speaking about that other source. Just look at Numbers. I know Numbers, that's a strange thing, because how can you say, what can you say? The Synoptic Problem. Okay, Matthew has 42 what is called peculiarities, and coincidences 58. Mark has only 7, and he has 93 coincidences. Luke has 59 and 41 coincidences, while John has 92 peculiarities but only 9 coincidences. Coincidence means that they are similar. So Matthew has 1068 verses. 500 of them are in common with Mark. Luke has, that's the biggest gospel, he has 1149 verses, but 320 are common with Mark. Mark has 661 verses, but only 50 to 55 verses are not found neither in Matthew or in Luke. Matthew and Luke have 200 verses in common, which are not found in Mark. Luke has 580 verses peculiar to itself. Well, that's because of he's speaking to the Gentiles. Matthew has 300 verses peculiar to itself because he has a Jewish target group. So that is to say that a number of verses are the same, number of verses are different. You have material from Mark being used, heavily being used by Matthew and Luke. And then you have Matthew and Luke, and they have material that is not being used in Mark or in John. And then you have John. 90% of this material is unique. So there are nobody else is using them. So the proposed solutions so the question of relationships, we are going to go over it. Utilization, hypothesis, the proto-gospel hypothesis, the tradition. Sorry, I will go to the next slide. The tradition hypothesis and the multiple source hypothesis. And we are going, like I said, we are going to come back to this immediately. So this is just saying that these are a number of theories being brought into our life to let us know what is going on. And let's look at it, okay? Because it's always important to have a good understanding of what people are saying, what people are doing, and why they are doing what they are doing. So the first 3 books in the New Testament all are called Gospels because they are speaking about the life, the work, the ministry, the death, the resurrection, the ascension of Jesus Christ. So those materials, of course, they have at least a similar backbone. That's very clear. All of them. All 4 of them. But the 3 first ones, they have so much similarity that we have to talk about it. So how come we have these similarities? So the 3 books are there, and they are commonly called the Synoptic Gospels because of the way they perceive reality, the way they write history. That's how you can say it. And they are different from the Gospel of John. In fact, their similarities in relationship to each other have created one of the most debated subjects in the realm of the New Testament studies. This area of scholarship has adopted the name, and here we have a Synoptic Problem. So Mark Gospel is the shortest of the 3, yet the largest portion is also found in Matthew and Luke. Actually, Matthew and Luke share a significant amount of the verses between them, which are not found in Mark. So when you have, say for just for a moment, that Mark is the original gospel, and then the others are bringing up other material, then there should be a different source from Luke and Matthew, because they also have very much a similarity of 200 verses. That's a lot of material, and so we have to explain that too. So there are a number of possibilities, and we are looking at one. Here we have the Augustine, that's the early church. And when we say the early church, it's not just Augustine, because even before him, Irenaeus and Origen, they have a similar idea. The idea is that Matthew is not only the first one in our Bibles, but they claim Matthew is the first one written. And then out of Matthew came Luke and Mark. There are direct lines between Matthew and Mark and Matthew and Luke. Remember, we had Matthew and Luke, and they are covering almost everything that's being said in the book of Mark. But also between Matthew and Luke, you have a number of verses, over 200, similar to each other. So saying that Mark is the original gospel would be different or difficult when you have Matthew and Luke having so much material equal. So that's the problem the early church faced, and so they said Matthew is the one who wrote the gospel first, and then Luke and Mark came later. And yes, that is one of the ideas being given to us over many years. Then you have the two gospel hypothesis. It's also called the grease bag theory. It's like the Augustinian one. So Matthew is the central one, and the theory is that Matthew has priority, but the two gospel holds that Luke is being the second gospel and not the third one. So that's a small small. That's a slight difference in the way the people look at it. Okay, so when Matthew was the first one, Luke is the second one, and Mark is the third one. So Mark would have used both Matthew and Luke. Again, a whole range of people are following that idea, and I'm not saying no to it and not saying yes to it. I'm just presenting it as a possibility. There is already when you have this, then you have a difficulty, a problem. A problem is evolving when you say Matthew is the first one, Luke the second one, and Mark the third one, because then you are saying to Mark, oh, you omitted a lot of material. So what do you do? How can you say this? How can you say to a gospel writer, excuse me, you knock at the door and say, what did you do? I mean, why did you delete so much material? So it's the theory is not that strong as it may look like. We have to remember that Mark wrote down the materials from the Apostle Peter. He was the translator and secretary of the Apostle Peter, according to the early church. If indeed Mark is the abridgment of the Matthew and Luke, it also will be hard to give account for the deletion of material. Let me say, very important things about Jesus are not in the book of Mark. For example, nothing about the birth of Christ. Another very important issue the Sermon of the Mount is not in the book of Mark. So when you have this thing from Matthew, the first one, Mark comes out of it. Okay, well, that's the difficulty. We have to understand that when people at that time, when they spoke about the biblical material, one claim they laid was Matthew was written originally in Aramaic, in the Hebrew, the local Hebrew language. So that gives us an open door to say something else about the priority, because if Matthew is a gospel written in Hebrew and then being translated into the Greek language, and Luke and Mark are both Greek materials, then how come you have so much similarity? There's no explanation for that. It's actually quite obvious that that is not a possibility. So we have to exclude that. Even when early church would say this is what happened, they are right. They may be right in saying, okay, Matthew wrote the first gospel. I'm saying maybe, maybe they are, but he wrote it in Aramaic. So the materials we have no Aramaic material as such that we can claim of as saying this is earlier than Mark. The earliest, but the oldest material we have from the New Testament is a little parcel of the book of Mark. So this is the two gospel theory. Now we have the two source theory. Let me see if I have this. Yes, here it is. The two source material. The two source material starts with the idea that Mark and another source, which we claim to be Q. Be careful. When we say we, it is a claim. It's not a scientific fact. There is a possibility, because we do not have a written, a material hard copy of the thing we called Q. Okay, so this is important. So the two source theory is that Mark is the first one. Matthew and Luke are coming out of this material from Mark, and because Mark and Luke, they have other material in common, but not in common with Mark, so they needed to have a other source, and that source is called Q. Q is the word, is from the German word Quelle, which means source or spring. So what is being said is that there is a possibility here that the next to Mark there's a Q. Let me explain. Q can be many things, and I have my own theory about it, which is partly built on the Bible itself. Luke writes about it. According to my understanding, when you say Q, yes, there is a extra source. The extra source can be Mother Mary, the mother of Jesus, or it can be other eyewitnesses. For example, a number of apostles who never wrote anything in the Bible, and there's a time when Paul was in prison. There's a time period of 2 years where we don't find anything about Luke, and that gives us a time frame for Luke to go back and to visit all these people and then writing the material down, which we now have as the Gospel of Luke. And then later on he wrote the book of Acts. So you have the two-source theory, Mark and another source. That other source can be oral tradition. That other source can be the apostles, but also people like Mary, or the Marys actually, several of them, and several of the people who were there with Jesus. Remember, in Matthew 10 already we're talking about 72 people being sent out. So there must be a bigger group of people except for the 12. So that's what I'm thinking when you speak about the different sources. But it's not finished yet, okay? Because there's more in theological circles. We have what is called the four sources hypothesis. So we have Mark, we have Q, and then we have material that is unique to Matthew. So where did Matthew get his material from? So we call that M. Well, when you have Matthew, call M, that's clearly about himself or the surrounding area. And Luke, we call his sources Luke or L. Luke is not claiming to be an eyewitness, but he's claiming that his words are eyewitness words. So again, for the sake of arguments, of understanding, Mark is a source, Q, the people outside of or oral tradition, and then you have Matthew, who has his own sources. Maybe Matthew's sources also are some of the apostles. Luke's sources are some of the apostles. Luke's sources are the Marys. Luke's sources are probably the 72 or the 120 or the 500 where Paul is speaking about. So there's a whole range of people that can be included in this idea of the four sources theory or hypothesis. Again, what's the problem with an explanation like this? Well, there is no proof of an M source, there's no proof of an L source, and there's no proof of a Q source. When I say proof, I mean manuscripts or the early church saying something about those different sources, the M, the Q, the L. Mark we know. And the priority of Mark is something that is being, you can almost say, accepted for a long time and by very many scholars. So when you have this idea of the four source hypothesis, I think you're getting close to it. I'm quite sure that Matthew has information outside of where Luke went, and Luke had information outside where Mark went. But what I also believe is that Mark was one of the sources, but for Luke, there was a source like Matthew. And maybe Matthew was the source for Luke. We have no idea how the cooperation between those two functioned. We only know that both of them were alive in the same time era. We know that they lived together for a time. We know more about Luke because of his book, the book of Acts, Acts of the Apostles. So we have more information about him. And then he's a co-worker with the Apostle Paul. And Matthew is someone, you can almost say, hidden behind the curtain of the gospel, the only gospel that bear or carry his name. So it's clear. Okay, let's look at Mark in this whole equation. Where did Mark get his material from? Well, his material came from, yes, the Apostle Peter. So we have a source. It's not Mark. The source is actually Peter. So instead of Mark, we should have Peter there. But since since Peter is not the writer himself, so we call it Mark. But the content is Petrine, is not Marcan. By saying this, we are saying we have an extra source here in the equation missing. Although it's not really missing, it's more or less hidden. But the same goes for the in the equation for the L, the Luke material, or the M for the Matthew material, and again for the Q material. So there's a multiple sources. There are multiple sources, and some of the sources are similar and the same. Some of the sources are totally different from each other. I'm not saying hidden, but remember the story of the early church. Well, one thing Jesus demanded from the church was go out and preach the gospel. If the apostles, the sent out ones, were doing that, they would have been away most of the time, or at least for a long time. So we don't know exactly when, who was where, and who met who. Again, we don't know. Because next to the source of the book of Acts, we should have another source. And again, you feel that Q is popping up here again. Because we don't know. We just call it, there is a source. And that source is different from M, from L, from Mark and Peter. So we know that there's a multiple choice, there's a multiple source, and even if that theory is not really in place today, or would not be in place today, because I think it is, many scholars today would have this point of view, and even that it's too limited. Let me see if we have the fire also here. No, we don't. But let's go to the next theory. We don't have a slide, but the slide actually here, the Marcan theory, is bringing that. Okay, what Farrer is saying saying my theory, he says it is Mark who is the main source, and then you have Matthew and you have Luke, the people themselves, not just the Gospels, but the people themselves are actually speaking out and writing down the material. So the priority is to Mark, and then Matthew and Luke are borrowing from Mark. But of course you have to have the Matthew-Luke line also. So what we have is the possibility that Luke actually went to Matthew, sat down with him, and went together they went over the gospel Matthew was writing, and Luke was saying, yeah, right. So he had the Marcan material, and now he had the Matthew material. And then everything is being said. There's no need for a Q, there's no need for an M, there's no need for an L. Because the people lived together at that time, and I assume they spoke to each other. Or Luke had access to the Matthean Gospel and to the Marcan Gospel. And so he brought them together, and that is included in his introduction. So I think that there is no need for all this elaborated and important looking, very difficult wording and ideas, when you just take the material as it is from the Bible, saying, let's look at it from the biblical point of view. It would be much easier for Matthew to borrow from Mark and add material to it than to have the opposite. Matthew being written first, and Mark is actually deleting, is omitting a lot of material. I don't think that's it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like something that is possibly happening. And the same goes with Luke. But when you add Luke to Matthew, or you had access to the Matthean and to the Marcan materials, then everything with the priority of Mark and this in the equation, you can almost say the problem is solved. Now we have, I think, a very good theory that Mark is the original. Like I said, we have material going back to the first decade after the death of Christ. That's the little thing we find, a little manuscript, possibly a Marcan text. Let's think it's a Marcan text, and then we have Mark first, Matthew, Luke after. There's also a possibility that Luke was the second one and Matthew was borrowing from Luke. That is also a possibility. I mean, you don't have to think that it's automatically Mark, Matthew, Luke. For me, that would be almost the normal thing to do, because in Luke we have him interviewing the people, and so I think, yeah, that's a good idea to say that would be a possibility. That omits L, that omits M, that omits Q, which we do not have any proof of. So this is, you can almost say, more scientific than the scholars were saying. Even Jerome, even Augustine, remember Augustine was a North African living in Italy. He became a bishop of the church at that time. And then you feel that is already incorporated in a ecclesiastical system, and he was accepted by the church, and his materials were accepted by the church. And I'm not saying anything about that. I'm just saying this is what happened. I believe that the Holy Spirit is at work in Matthew, Mark, Luke. And when you bring them together, you finally have the material. And then, of course, by extension, we have to add the material of the book of John. John also have 90% of his own material and 10% borrowed material. Well, borrowed material is very difficult to say because he was part of the band and he was part of this kernel group of people around Jesus, the 3 disciples closest to Jesus. He was part of that group. So what I'm saying is we have privileged people speaking out and giving the material to us. So we don't have to look further. I think we have the solution by giving priority to Mark influencing Matthew, and Luke interviewing Matthew, with the Gospel of John being separated because it has 90% of his own material and 10% not borrowed material but common material. Okay, so that is what we have here. So I think that is what we have to go for and look for it. So I hope you understand now better the ideas of the Marcan priority. And yes, we talked about a number of things of the priority of Mark, and I since I believe that is what we are looking for, so that is for the next class. We are going to go into the priority of Mark. We have a number of arguments and we are going to talk about it. So I hope God will bless you, and I hope you have a good time with the Lord. Let us have a word of prayer. Father in heaven, we thank you for the Gospels, for the multiple Gospels, for the borrowing of the materials. We thank you for the fact that we now have so much good material available to us, so we can have a good view of what the Lord Jesus Christ did on earth and how he prepared his people for the next step after your son Jesus died at the cross, after his resurrection, after his ascension. And so we are thankful that you ordered the church into being and that we are now part of it. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.